A poor girl stands in front of a mansion holding a photo and asks the billionaire, "Have you seen this boy? He's my brother, but he disappeared." What he does next shocked everyone. The rain showed no mercy that October afternoon. Richard Allencourt watched the drops sliding down the window of his office in the mansion. At 45, he ran a business empire that stretched across 3 continents, yet the impeccable garden view no longer impressed him. The grey sky matched his mood as he reviewed yet another financial report without any enthusiasm. He closed the laptop and rubbed his tired eyes. Just another day like all the others. He couldn't remember when his life had become so predictable. Wake up, work, sleep, repeat. His fortune kept growing in the bank, while something dwindled in his chest. The sound of the doorbell surprised him. He wasn't expecting visitors, especially in such a downpour. He glanced at his watch, almost 6 in the evening. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. "Must be a delivery," he murmured to himself. He went downstairs, passing by a few valuable artworks hanging on the walls. Normally, his butler would answer the door, but Johnson had the day off. Richard hesitated a moment before opening. It was rare for him to open his own front door. When he finally opened it, he didn't see anyone. Then he looked down and was startled. A small girl, completely soaked, gazed up at him with big brown eyes. She was shivering from the cold, but her gaze was firm and determined. "Hello," Richard said, intrigued, leaning down to be nearer to her height. "Can I help you?" The girl, without saying a word, held up a photograph protected by a plastic bag. In the picture, a boy of about 7 smiled shyly. "This is my brother Daniel," she finally said, her voice surprisingly clear. "Have you seen him?" Richard looked at the photo, then at the girl. "No, I haven't. Who are you, little one?" "Sophia Moreau," she replied, stretching out her hand as an adult might, still holding the photo in her other hand. "My brother Daniel went missing and I'm looking for him." Richard shook that cold little hand, feeling a strange pang in his chest. Her formality was as disconcerting as it was moving. "Sophia, it's raining really hard. You shouldn't be out here alone. Where's your mother?" "Mum is in heaven," she answered simply. "I live at St. Clair's orphanage." Richard froze for a moment. The direct way she spoke of such deep tragedies caught him off guard. "You walk around the city alone." "I'm searching everywhere for Daniel," she said determinedly. "I saw your big house and thought he might be here. He likes pretty houses." "Come in, Sophia," Richard said, realizing the girl was shivering more and more. "You'll get sick if you stay out in the rain." She hesitated for a moment but stepped inside. Richard grabbed a clean towel from a hallway closet and handed it to the girl. She accepted it, but kept the photo protected with care. "Let's go to the kitchen. It's warmer there," he suggested, surprised at the concern he felt. In the spacious, immaculate kitchen, Richard turned on the kettle. He normally didn't cook, he had a full staff for that, but he did at least know how to make hot chocolate. "Daniel also likes hot chocolate," Sophia commented as she watched Richard work at the stove. "When it rains, he always asks Mrs. Palmer to make some for everyone at the orphanage." "Mrs. Palmer is the one who takes care of you all." "Yes, she's the director. She's probably worried about me now, but I had to find Daniel." Sophia looked toward the window. "He's been gone a long time." Richard placed the steaming mug of chocolate in front of her. Sophia put the photo carefully on the table so she could hold the mug with both hands, her eyes shining with the simple pleasure of the warm drink. "How did he disappear?" Richard asked, sitting across from her. "We were at the park. Some other kids from the orphanage were there too. Daniel went after the ball and..." She shook her head. "He never came back. Nobody saw where he went." "Sir, they should come in." Richard hesitated. Taking in a child he didn't know seemed unwise, but leaving her in the rain was unthinkable. "Sophia, I'll help you. First, we need to get you dried off before you get sick. Do you live far from here?" She nodded. "St. Clair's orphanage. It's far from the park." Richard felt his heart clench. Our 5-year-old child walking alone through the city, in the rain, looking for her missing brother. He took the towel and handed it to Sophia again, who accepted it gratefully. "Johnson," Richard said to the butler, "bring her something warm to drink." As the butler left, Sophia stood there, rubbing her wet hair with the towel. She showed no fear or nervousness about being in a stranger's house, only that impressive determination. The butler returned with a steaming mug of hot chocolate, which Sophia accepted with both hands, her eyes momentarily lighting up with childish delight at the drink. "Daniel also likes hot chocolate," she said after a few sips. "When it rains, he always asks Mrs. Palmer to make some for everyone." Richard knelt so he was at her level. "I need to take you back to the orphanage. They must be worried about you." "But I have to keep looking for Daniel," she insisted, looking out the window as if her brother might appear at any moment. "I know you want to find your brother," Richard said gently, "and I want to help. But first, we need to talk to the people at the orphanage. They must be really worried." "Mrs. Palmer is always worried," she said, scrunching her nose, "but she's not searching for Daniel the right way." The way she spoke, so articulate for such a small child, impressed Richard. "Marcus," Richard called out, turning to the driver who waited discreetly. "Get the car ready. We're taking Sophia back." 20 minutes later, the Bentley stopped in front of an old brick building. A discreet sign read, "St. Clair's Orphanage, established 1908. The place was well kept but clearly modest. As soon as they got out of the car, the main door opened, and a middle-aged woman with graying hair in a tight bun ran toward them, braving the rain. "Sophia Moreau! Thank goodness!" She stopped upon seeing Richard. "Oh, sir, thank you so much for bringing her. We've been looking for her for 2 hours." Sophia didn't run to the woman. She stayed beside Richard, holding his hand firmly. "I found her at the gate of my house," Richard explained, shielding the girl with the umbrella. "Mr. Alancourt?" the woman asked, surprised. "I'm Mrs. Palmer, the director of St. Clair's. Please come in. This child needs to dry off before she catches pneumonia." Inside, the orphanage was clean and organized, but furnished with worn pieces. Children of various ages peeked curiously from doors and hallways as they walked by. Richard felt their eyes following him. Clearly, men in suits didn't visit often. In the small director's office, Sophia was handed over to a staff member to change her clothes, though she cast a meaningful look at Richard, as if saying, "Don't go away." "Mr. Alancourt, I don't know how to thank you," Mrs. Palmer said, offering him a towel. "Sophia has never run away before. She's usually a very obedient child. She told me she's looking for her brother," Richard said, wiping his face. "Daniel, right?" The director's smile faded. "Yes, it's a terrible situation. Daniel disappeared almost 3 months ago. The police investigated, but," she sighed heavily, "with so many cases and limited resources, a missing orphan isn't a priority." "How did it happen?" "Daniel went to play in the park nearby with a group of children and 2 supervisors. At some point, he simply vanished. No one saw anything. There were no concrete leads." She lowered her voice. "Sophia refuses to accept it. She insists he'll come back, that someone needs to search harder. What about their mother? Isabella Moreau passed away a little over a year ago. Cancer. She fought bravely, but..." Mrs. Palmer shook her head. "Both children were left alone in the world. Isabella had no close family who could take them." Richard felt an inexplicable jolt upon hearing the mother's name. It was a common enough name to be just a coincidence, he thought. "Children without a home suffer twice as much when they lose siblings," Mrs. Palmer continued. "It's the last family bond they have." Sophia returned in dry clothes, still holding the protected photo. She sat in a chair near Richard, as though his presence gave her security. "Sophia, Mr. Alancourt is leaving now," Mrs. Palmer began. "We need to thank him for..." "Will you help me find Daniel?" Sophia interrupted, looking directly into Richard's eyes. Silence filled the office. Richard felt the weight of the question and the child's determined gaze. He was a specialist in complex business deals, not missing persons cases. The logical response would be to offer a donation to the orphanage and move on. But something in those brown eyes stopped him from turning away. "I'll do what I can," he replied, surprising even himself. "I have some contacts who might help." Sophia's face lit up with a smile that seemed to brighten the entire room. "Mr. Alancourt, Mrs. Palmer interjected cautiously. This is extremely kind of you, but we don't want to cause you any trouble. It's no trouble, he said firmly. He pulled a card from his jacket's inner pocket and handed it to the director. I'll need more information about Daniel and the circumstances of his disappearance. Can we talk tomorrow? Mrs. Palmer looked at the card as though it were a relic. Of course, whatever you need. Richard stood up to leave, but Sophia held his hand. Can I show you something before you go? He nodded, curious. The girl led him by the hand through the hallway to a small shared dormitory. There were 5 beds, each with a small trunk at the foot. Sophia led him to one of them. This is Daniel's bed. I keep his things for when he comes back. She opened the trunk and took out a small sketchbook. The pages were filled with childish drawings, surprisingly good for a 7-year-old. He's very good at drawing, Richard commented. He wants to be an artist when he grows up, Sophia replied in the present tense, as if refusing to consider any possibility other than her brother's return. Richard flipped through the sketchbook and stopped at a drawing of a woman and 2 children holding hands. Is this your family? Sophia nodded. Mom is there. She was the best mother in the world. Richard felt something odd stir within him as he looked at the drawing. The woman's figure had long, dark hair, just like Sophia's. Your mother, what was she like? Sophia smiled. She was beautiful, and she told the best stories. She spoke French too. Sometimes she sang us French songs to help us sleep. Moreau, French, dark hair. Richard felt a chill down his spine but pushed the thought away. Coincidences happen. Mr. Alancourt, came Mrs. Palmer's voice from the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but it's going to rain again soon. Richard returned the sketchbook to Sophia. I'll come back tomorrow, okay? We'll start looking for your brother. Promise? I promise. In the car on the way home, Richard couldn't stop thinking about the girl and her determination. Marcus drove in silence until he finally asked, Everything all right, sir? Richard realized he'd been staring at the rain, lost in thought. Yes. Just thinking. The little girl touched your heart, didn't she? Richard almost denied it instinctively. He wasn't known for showing emotions, but he nodded. There's something about her. I can't explain. Once home, he dismissed the butler and went straight to his private office. He sat at his computer and typed, Isabella Moreau. The search brought up various results. He filtered them for the region and recent years. A simple obituary appeared, dated the previous year. Isabella Marie Moreau, 38, passed away after a long battle with cancer. She is survived by 2 children, Daniel, 7, and Sophia, 5. Private ceremony. There was a small photo. Richard felt his heart stop for a moment. Those eyes, that subtle smile. My God, he murmured, leaning back in his chair. Isabella, his Isabella, the woman he had loved 20 years ago, when he was just an ambitious student in Paris. The love he abandoned to pursue his business path. The person he had promised to come back for once he was established, but never did. How did he not see it? Sophia had the same eyes as her mother. He opened a drawer and took out an old box. Inside was a single photograph, he and Isabella in an embrace in front of the Eiffel Tower, young and in love. Turning the photo over, he read the delicate handwriting, Forever, no matter the distance, Isa. The clock read nearly midnight by the time Richard managed to organize his tumultuous thoughts. Isabella, his Isabella, gone. And she left 2 children behind. Why had she never looked for him? Did they really end on such bad terms? He remembered their last conversation. He was explaining he had to return to the United States to take over the family business. She was too understanding, saying she would wait if needed. And he, arrogant and self-assured, promised he would come back for her when he was established. But years went by. The business grew. His father passed away. The company demanded more and more attention. Eventually, that promise was forgotten, or rather, deliberately ignored once fear of commitment outweighed his love. Richard rubbed his face, feeling the weight of decades of poor choices, of the love he left behind. The digital clock showed 3:27 a.m. when Richard finally formed a plan. He would use all his resources, money, contacts, power, to find Daniel. He would hire private investigators, offer rewards, pressure the police, not just for Sophia, but because Morse, in some way, he felt that helping Isabella's children was the only way to honor the memory of the woman he once loved, and to redeem years of regret he hadn't even realized he carried. Opening the window, he noticed the rain had stopped. The sky was beginning to lighten on the horizon, signaling the start of a new day. Richard Alencourt, the billionaire for whom time was just another resource to be managed, found himself counting the hours until he could return to St. Clair's orphanage. For the first time in many years, something other than business mattered. And that something had the determined face of a 5-year-old girl and the photograph of a missing boy. The meeting room in Richard's office looked transformed. Maps of the city covered an entire wall, with red markers indicating places already checked. Photos of Daniel were scattered across the central table, alongside investigators' reports and contact lists. In the last 2 weeks, the billionaire had converted part of his corporate empire into a search center. "Sir, our team in the Eastern District finished their sweep," reported James Carter, a former police detective and the current head of the operation hired by Richard. "No leads yet." Richard nodded, his eyes fixed on the map. Each day without news of Daniel weighed more heavily, not just for Sophia, who anxiously awaited any update, but because Richard himself was consumed by the search. What about the homeless shelters? All checked twice. A boy matching Daniel's description was seen at the St. Vincent shelter 3 days ago, but it turned out to be another child. Richard rubbed his tired eyes. He hadn't slept well since he began the search. "Expand the area and double the reward for information. We're already offering $50,000 keen, Mr. Alencourt. Then make it 100,000. Money is irrelevant." Carter hesitated. "With all due respect, sir, that could attract a flood of false leads. We're already overwhelmed with dead-end tips." Richard knew Carter was right, but anxiety spoke louder. "Then filter them better. Hire more staff if needed." Richard's phone rang, the special ringtone he'd set for calls from the orphanage. He answered immediately. "Hello, Mrs. Palmer?" "Actually, it's Sophia," replied the small voice on the other end. One of the social workers must have lent her the phone. "Are you coming to visit me today?" Richard couldn't help smiling. In recent days, his visits to the orphanage had become routine. "Yes, little one. Around 5 o'clock, okay?" 5 o'clock, she confirmed seriously. "I'll be waiting on the steps." When he hung up, he noticed Carter watching him curiously. "Daniel's sister," Richard explained, as if needing to justify the smile. "You really care about these kids," Carter observed without judgment. "It's not just another project to you." Richard stared at the map again. "No, it's not." The Bentley arrived at St. Clair's orphanage precisely at 5. As promised, Sophia sat on the step outside, a sketchbook in her lap. The moment she spotted the car, she leaped to her feet. "He's punctual," Sophia told Mrs. Palmer, who stood in the doorway. The word punctual sounded funny in her childish voice. "Hello, Sophia," Richard greeted her, getting out of the car with a small package in hand. "How was your day?" "Normal. I did my math homework and drew pictures." She pointed to her sketchbook. "Any news about Daniel?" It was always her first question. Richard had learned not to offer false hope. "We're still looking. Lots of people are helping." Disappointment flashed in her eyes for a second, but Sophia had grown used to handling letdowns. She nodded with maturity. "I brought something for you," he said, extending the package. She opened it carefully. Sophia never tore wrapping paper, always untying ribbons and folding the paper. Inside was a set of professional colored pencils, the kind artists use. "Wow," she exclaimed, touching each pencil reverently. "They're like the ones Daniel always wanted. I thought you could draw while we wait for news of him. And when he comes back, you can share." Sophia hugged the pencil case to her chest. "Thanks. I'll save half for him." Mrs. Palmer, watching from the doorway, motioned for them to come inside. "It's getting cold out here." Inside the orphanage, the other children were used to Richard's presence by now. Some waved, others approached to show him toys or drawings. Unlike his first visits, when they treated him like a celebrity, he was now simply Sophia's friend who's looking for Daniel. "Mr. Alencourt, could we speak for a moment?" asked Mrs. Palmer, indicating her office. Sophia got the hint. "I'll go show my pencils to Amy, be right back." When they were alone, the director closed the door. "Some social workers are asking questions about your involvement with Sophia." Richard frowned. "What kind of questions?" "About your intentions. It's unusual for an outsider, especially someone with your profile, to get so involved with a child from the system. I'm just helping her find her brother. We know that, and we're immensely grateful." Mrs. Palmer hesitated. "But Sophia is growing very attached to you. She talks about you constantly, draws pictures of the two of you together. When you don't find Daniel, or if the visits stop suddenly..." Richard understood the concern. "I won't abandon her, Mrs. Palmer. Not intentionally, I'm sure. But your life is complicated. Companies, travel, commitments. Sophia is my priority now," he affirmed, with a conviction that surprised even himself. "And she will remain so, with or without Daniel." The director studied him for a few moments, as if measuring the sincerity of his words. "You know, in the first few weeks after Daniel disappeared, Sophia stopped speaking. Completely. The therapists were very worried." She offered a gentle smile. "Since you showed up, she's almost back to her old self." Richard didn't know how to respond. Something inside him warmed. "We just need to be sure there won't be another abandonment in her life," Mrs. Palmer concluded. "There won't be," Richard promised. When he left the office, he found Sophia waiting in the hallway, holding her new pencil set and her sketchbook. "Want to see what I drew today?" she asked, opening the sketchbook without waiting for an answer. On the page were 3 figures: a small dark-haired girl, a slightly older boy, and a tall man in a suit. The 3 were holding hands. "That's us," she explained, pointing to each figure. "Me, Daniel, and you." Richard felt something tighten in his chest. "It's a very beautiful drawing, Sophia. When we find Daniel, we can be like that," she said, with a simplicity that made it even more poignant. "He'll like you." "I hope so," Richard replied, trying to ignore the lump forming in his throat. The next day, Richard was in his office at the company when he received a call from Carter. "Sir, I think we have something." Richard straightened in his chair. "Go on." "One of our contacts in social services got a tip about a solitary boy showing up at a small square in the North District. It matches Daniel's age and physical description. Apparently, he's been sleeping on a bench and receiving food from local vendors. Why didn't anyone report it before? That area has a lot of homeless children, and according to witnesses, he runs when adults approach. He only accepted food from an elderly lady who sells sandwiches there." "I'm going there now," Richard said, already reaching for his jacket. "Sir, maybe it's better if our team confirms first." "I'm going in person, Carter." 20 minutes later, the Bentley parked near the square in question. It was a modest place, with a few worn wooden benches and a small play area. Street vendors sold food and trinkets along the edges. Richard brought a photo of Daniel and showed it to several vendors. Most shook their heads until he reached an elderly woman with a sandwich cart. "Ah, yes," she said, adjusting her glasses to see the photo better. "He's the quiet boy. He's been coming around these last few days. Very polite, but doesn't talk much." Richard's heart pounded. "When did you last see him?" "This morning. I gave him a sandwich and some juice." "Poor thing looked starving, but insisted on giving me a drawing as payment." She smiled. "He's got talent, that little one." "A drawing?" Richard felt a chill. According to Sophia, Daniel loved to draw. "Yes, I keep them all. I have a grandson who draws too, so I appreciate art." She pulled out a few carefully folded sheets from a folder. They were simple pencil sketches on scraps of salvaged paper, but one caught Richard's eye immediately. A little girl with dark hair and a wide smile. "Sophia," he murmured, recognizing the likeness. "You know the girl in the drawing?" the woman asked, surprised. "She's his sister. We've been searching for this boy for weeks. He disappeared from St. Clair's orphanage." The woman's eyes widened. "My goodness, I thought he was just another homeless child. There are so many here. When does he usually show up? Late afternoon, around 6 East, when I start packing up?" Richard checked his watch. 5:40 p.m. "I'll wait." He sat on a bench with a full view of the square. He tried to blend in, removing his jacket and loosening his tie, though he knew he still looked out of place. He asked Marcus, his driver, to park farther away so as not to attract attention. While waiting, he called the orphanage. "Is Sophia there?" he asked as soon as Mrs. Palmer answered. "Yes, she's in the activity room with the other children." "Do you want to speak to her?" "Not yet. Maybe we've located Daniel." The silence on the other end was palpable. "Are you sure?" "Not yet, but the signs are promising. I don't want to get her hopes up until we confirm." "Of course, I understand. I'll be hoping this is really him." Richard ended the call and turned his attention back to the square. People passed by, some in a hurry after work, others strolling leisurely, enjoying the late afternoon. Children ran around the small play area, their laughter echoing. And then he saw him. From the opposite corner, a skinny, dark-haired boy in ragged clothes approached warily. He looked around nervously, as if afraid of being followed. Even from a distance, Richard recognized the features. The boy from the photo, a bit thinner and more disheveled, but unmistakably Daniel. His first instinct was to run over to him, but he held back. If the boy was running from adults, a sudden approach might scare him away. He watched as Daniel cautiously neared the sandwich cart. The elderly vendor smiled upon seeing him. Richard saw the boy hand over another drawing, receive a sandwich, then sit on a distant bench to eat. He looked exhausted and scared, but not hurt. Richard breathed a sigh of relief. Now, how to approach a traumatized boy who would likely flee at the first sign of danger? He thought of Sophia, of her unwavering resolve to find her brother. If anyone could approach Daniel without scaring him, it would be her. But bringing her here without certainty was risky. The answer came as an epiphany. He took from his pocket the set of colored pencils he'd promised to give Daniel. Sophia had insisted he keep half to give Daniel when they found him. Moving slowly, he maintained a safe distance and sat on a bench nearby. He took out a blue pencil, then a piece of paper from his folder, and started sketching without any real skill. Just simple lines forming what might be a car. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Daniel's interest. The boy watched, probably curious about the man in a suit trying to draw. Richard continued, now adding what might be a house. His drawing was terrible, and he knew it. After a few minutes of feigned frustration, he sighed loudly. "I've never been good at drawing," he said, apparently to no one, but loud enough for the boy to hear. "My friend Sophia draws way better than me, and she's only 5. The mention of the name made Daniel stiffen visibly. Richard kept going without looking directly at him. "She gave me these pencils to give to her brother, Daniel. She said he's an amazing artist." Richard placed the open pencil case on the bench beside him. "But I'm having trouble finding him." A tense silence lingered. Richard dared not look, fearing he'd scare the boy away. "Why are you looking for him?" The child's voice, almost a whisper, made Richard hold his breath for a second. He turned slowly to find Daniel standing a few feet away, watching him with a mix of fear and hope. "Because I promised his sister I'd help," Richard answered sincerely. "Sophia is very worried about you." "Is Sophia okay?" The question came out laden with concern. "Yes, she's fine. She's at St. Clair's waiting for you. She hasn't stopped drawing pictures of the two of you together." Daniel took a small step forward, still wary. "Do you really know Sophia?" Richard nodded, taking out his phone. He showed Daniel a photo he'd taken a few days before, Sophia smiling, holding one of her drawings. Upon seeing the image, Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Can I see my sister?" "Of course. I'm here to take you back to her." Richard stood up slowly, so as not to startle him. "My name is Richard Allencourt. Your sister found me when she was looking for you." "She went looking for you?" Daniel seemed surprised. "Sophia left the orphanage." "Yes." "She's very determined when it comes to you," Richard said with a smile. "She showed up at my door asking if I'd seen her brother." Daniel took another step, more confident now. "She's always been stubborn." "I noticed. So what about you? Why did you run off when you vanished from the park?" The boy's face grew serious. "I didn't run off. Some men took me. They said I'd get gifts if I went with them." Richard felt a surge of anger. "What happened then?" They took me to an apartment with other kids, but I managed to escape when they weren't looking. I'm scared to go back to the orphanage in case they find me again." Rage boiled within Richard. Child trafficking. He needed to inform the police immediately, but first he had to prioritize Daniel's safety. "No one will hurt you again," he promised, keeping his voice calm despite the fury inside. "I have people who will protect you and Sophia." Daniel looked down, then at the pencils on the bench. "Sophia really saved half of them for me." "Yes. She never lost hope of finding you." The boy finally smiled, picking up the pencil case. "Can I see her now?" "We can go right away." Richard extended his hand without forcing contact. To his surprise, Daniel took it without hesitation. As they walked toward the car, Richard realized how much his life had changed in just a few weeks. From a solitary billionaire focused only on business, he now felt genuine concern for two children who had stumbled into his life by chance. Or maybe it wasn't so random. Maybe it was fate correcting a mistake from the past, giving him a second chance to honor the love he once felt for Isabella. Daniel got in the car and sat quietly, looking out the window with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Richard sent a message to Carter, briefly explaining the situation and asking him to mobilize the security team. He also texted Mrs. Palmer, "We found Daniel, we're on our way." What Daniel had revealed changed everything. He wasn't just a child who had wandered off. He had been taken by someone. Richard vowed that besides reuniting the siblings, he would do everything in his power to uncover and punish those responsible. As the car glided through the streets toward the orphanage, Richard observed Daniel's profile, noticing the similarity with Sophia, the same large eyes, the same dark hair. Isabella's children. They weren't his biological children, at least he believed so at the time, but in that moment Richard knew, with a certainty he had never felt before, that he would do anything to protect them. They had filled a void in his life he hadn't even known existed. And now, the joy Sophia would feel when she saw her brother again would be the greatest reward he could imagine. Richard's car approached St. Clair's orphanage as the sun began to set. Seated in the back, Daniel remained quiet, clutching his pencil case like a talisman. Occasionally, he glanced at Richard with a mix of curiosity and caution. "We're almost there," Richard said gently. "Sophia must be waiting." Daniel simply nodded, turning his gaze back to the window. During the whole ride, his responses had been monosyllabic whenever Richard tried to chat, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Richard sent a message to Mrs. Palmer, arriving in 5 minutes. "Please prepare Sophia." When the car finally stopped in front of the orphanage, Richard noticed a small welcome committee at the entrance, Mrs. Palmer, 2 social workers, and a bit behind them, Sophia, shifting from one foot to the other in excitement. "We're here," Richard announced. "Are you ready?" Daniel hesitated, staring at the building anxiously. "What if those men come back?" "They won't," Richard said firmly. "I'll personally make sure you're both safe." Before Daniel could respond, Sophia spotted the car. Recognizing Richard's vehicle, she ran toward it, ignoring Mrs. Palmer's calls. Marcus opened the door, and Richard barely had time to step out before Sophia drew close, her eyes darting around inside the car, anxious. "Daniel!" Her voice trembled slightly. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Daniel stepped out. The siblings stood face to face, simply looking at each other. Sophia, normally so talkative, seemed at a loss for words. Daniel, thin and haggard but still recognizable as the boy from the photo, kept his eyes locked on his sister. "Sophie," he finally said, using the nickname only he used. What happened next made Richard's throat tighten. Sophia ran to her brother and threw her arms around him with all the strength her small body could muster. Daniel dropped the pencil case and hugged her back, both finally giving in to the tears they had held back until then. "You disappeared," Sophia sobbed into his shoulder. "I looked everywhere for you." "I know," Daniel answered, his voice muffled. "I tried to come back too." The adults watched from a distance, giving them space. Richard realized his own eyes were damp, and he looked away to compose himself. When he looked again, Sophia had stepped back slightly to examine her brother. "You're so thin," she said, with a child's frankness. "And dirty." Daniel tried to smile. "Sorry." Sophia shook her head and took his hand. "Doesn't matter." "Come on, there's a lot of food inside." Hand in hand, they walked toward the orphanage. Sophia talked non-stop, explaining how she had found Richard and how he had helped search for Daniel. The boy listened silently, occasionally glancing back as though to confirm the billionaire was still there. Mrs. Palmer approached Richard as the children went inside. "I have no words to thank you," she said, emotion evident in her voice. "It's not necessary," Richard replied, "but we need to talk about what Daniel told me. He wasn't lost, he was taken." The director went pale. "My God, we suspected, but hearing the confirmation." "I've already mobilized my security team. I'm ensuring this place is guarded 24/7. And the police will need to question Daniel carefully. Of course, his well-being comes first. He looks so fragile." Richard nodded, watching the siblings entering the building. "I'll go in to make sure he's settling in. Then we can discuss next steps." Inside the orphanage's dining hall, Richard watched from a distance as Sophia sat next to her brother, making sure he ate every bite of the hastily prepared dinner. Daniel ate ravenously, but his eyes remained alert, scanning the room every few seconds. Mrs. Palmer approached Richard. "He's scared." "With good reason," Richard replied. "After he's finished eating, I'd like to speak with him, if that's all right with you." "Of course, we can use my office." She hesitated. "Should I be present?" Richard considered. "Maybe give him the option to speak with me alone or have you there. He needs to feel he has some control." The director seemed surprised by his answer. "For someone who told me he has no experience with children, you're showing remarkable sensitivity." Richard shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. He didn't mention that he had read dozens of articles about child trauma in recent weeks, preparing for this moment. Half an hour later, Daniel, now clean and wearing fresh clothes, sat cautiously in the chair in Mrs. Palmer's office. Sophia insisted on staying, and no one had the heart to deny her. "Daniel," Richard began softly, "I know you went through some very hard times. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but any information you share can help us make sure you and the other kids are safe." Daniel looked at Sophia, who nodded encouragingly. "You're going to catch the bad men. I'll do everything I can to make sure they're found and punished," Richard promised. The boy took a deep breath, as if mustering courage. "We were at the park. I went to get the ball that rolled near the trees. A man asked if I wanted some chocolate. When I said no, another man appeared behind me and grabbed me." Richard kept his face neutral despite the rage he felt. "Did they hurt you?" "Not much, only when I tried to scream." Daniel lowered his eyes. "They took me to an apartment. There were other kids there, but we couldn't talk. One of the men was always watching us." Sophia squeezed her brother's hand. Richard noticed that, despite her young age, she seemed to grasp how serious the situation was. "How did you get away?" Richard asked. "They were loading the kids into a van. When it was my turn, I pretended to climb in but ran. One of them tried to grab me, but I'm fast." A hint of pride crossed his face. "I hid in one place after another. I was scared to come back to the orphanage in case they were watching it." Richard nodded. "That was very brave and smart, Daniel." "But I left the other kids behind," the boy murmured, guilt evident in his voice. "You did the right thing," Richard assured him. "Because of you, we can now help the other children too." Daniel looked up. "How?" "I need you to help create sketches of the men who took you. I have people who specialize in that. Then we'll find them." "They'll come after me," Daniel said, fear radiating with every word. Richard leaned forward, meeting his gaze. "Daniel, I promise no one will hurt you or take you again. I'll put guards here 24/7. And I'm working on finding an even safer place for you and Sophia." "What place?" Sophia asked, curious. Richard hesitated. He hadn't discussed his plans with Mrs. Palmer yet. "A place where you can both stay together and be safe," he said vaguely. "But first, we need to make sure Daniel fully recovers." Mrs. Palmer intervened softly. "Sophia, Daniel must be exhausted. Why don't you help him get some rest? You can talk more tomorrow." Sophia looked ready to protest, but she glanced at her brother and nodded. "Come on, Dan. I kept all your stuff just the way you left it." Once the children had left, Mrs. Palmer turned to Richard. "What was that safer place you mentioned?" "My home," he said simply. "I have the space, the security and the resources to care for them properly. Mr. Alancourt, while I appreciate everything you've done, adoption or custody doesn't happen overnight. There are procedures, evaluations, adaptation periods." "I'm aware," he interrupted politely, "and I intend to follow all the required protocols. I'm not suggesting I take them tomorrow. But I will begin the process as soon as possible." The director studied him for a long moment. Why do you care so much about these specific children?" Richard knew this question would arise eventually. He decided to be partly honest. "I knew their mother once, a long time ago. I didn't realize they were her children until recently. I feel I owe it to her memory." 2 hours later, Richard was about to leave when Sophia appeared in the hallway, still awake. "Daniel finally fell asleep," she informed him. "He had nightmares the first few times he tried." Richard knelt to be on eye level with her. "That's normal after what he's been through. He'll get better with time." Sophia nodded with a seriousness beyond her years. "Thank you for bringing my brother back. I promised I'd help. Remember?" She gave a slight smile. "You're leaving now?" "Yes, it's late, but I'll be back tomorrow." Sophia seemed satisfied with that answer. "Daniel's scared of you." Her frankness caught him off guard. "Why is that?" "He thinks you want something in return for helping. Adults always want something." Richard felt a pang in his chest, hearing such a cynical view of the world from such a small child. "I don't want anything, Sophia. I helped because it was the right thing to do." She tilted her head, sizing him up. "I told him you're different. That you promised to help and you did. And I'll keep my promises," Richard said. "You can count on me for whatever you need." Sophia held up her pinky finger. "Pinky promise?" Richard smiled and hooked his pinky with hers. "Pinky promise." Satisfied, Sophia turned to go back to the dorm but paused. "Tomorrow Daniel wants to show you his drawings. He doesn't let anyone see them, but he said he would let you because you brought the colored pencils." "I'll consider it a great honor," Richard replied sincerely. Driving back home, Richard reflected on the day's events. Finding Daniel was only the beginning. The boy was physically safe, but psychological healing would take time. And the threat still loomed. Whoever was behind the abduction might try again. On his phone, his to-do list grew longer. Hire more security for the orphanage, start the process of temporary custody, investigate the trafficking network, prepare rooms in his house for the children. His world, once orderly and predictable, now revolved around 2 small lives that had entered it by chance or perhaps fate. Richard realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about contracts, acquisitions, or profits. He was thinking about how to gain Daniel's trust, how to keep that hopeful sparkle in Sophia's eyes, how to honor Isabella's memory by caring for what she loved most. Arriving at his empty, silent mansion, Richard made a decision. 2 of the guest rooms would be immediately transformed, one in shades of blue, with space for drawing, the other in pink tones, with shelves for books. He didn't know how long the legal process would take, but when Daniel and Sophia could come, he would be ready. And maybe, just maybe, they would fill the void he hadn't even known existed in his life until Sophia knocked on his door that rainy afternoon. Night had already fallen when Richard entered his private office in the mansion. After intense weeks helping Daniel readjust at the orphanage and expediting the custody process for the children, he finally had a moment to himself. He poured himself a whiskey and walked over to the window, looking at the distant city lights. The silence of the house, once comforting, now felt oppressive. He had grown used to Sophia's energy and, more recently, Daniel's quiet presence. His daily visits to the orphanage had become the highlight of his day. Richard opened the desk drawer and removed the old box he had kept for years. Inside, in addition to the photo of him with Isabella in Paris, were other small treasures. A note she had written in French, a ticket from a concert they had attended together, a small seashell they'd collected on a weekend trip to the coast. He sat down, holding the photograph under the lamp's light. Isabella smiled with that expression that had always captivated him, a mix of joy and mystery, as if she knew something he still needed to discover. "Why did you never look for me, Isa?" he murmured at the image, as though she might answer. 20 years ago, Richard had been just an American student in Paris, completing an exchange program in business administration. Isabella was studying literature at the Sorbonne. They met in a little bookstore near the Seine, both searching for the same rare book. The connection was immediate and intense, 6 months of a love that felt destined to last forever, until his father fell ill, forcing Richard to return to the United States to take over the family business. "I'll come back for you," he had promised at the airport. "Once I stabilize the company, I'll come get you." Isabella had smiled with those eyes Sophia inherited. "I'll wait," she'd replied simply. The first weeks were filled with daily phone calls, passionate letters, and future plans. Then, as the demands of the business grew and his father's health worsened, contact became less frequent. 3 months, 6 months, a year. Then, absorbed in expanding the company after his father's death, driven by ambition and work, Richard let the promise slip away. The calls stopped. The letters were no longer sent. Paris and Isabella became beautiful but distant memories of another life. Richard sipped the whiskey, feeling the familiar burn of guilt. How could he have been so negligent with what truly mattered? How had he allowed financial reports and board meetings to replace the one true love he'd known? And now, discovering Isabella had died, leaving behind 2 children, Sophia with her 5-year-old determination, and Daniel with his artistic talent and guarded eyes. Why had she never told him anything? Why had she never sought him out? Richard picked up the note written in Isabella's elegant handwriting. "Mon cœur t'appartient pour toujours." "Thaisa, my heart belongs to you forever, Isa," words he had failed to honor. He stood and walked to the shelf where he kept a photo album from that time. Few people knew this sentimental side of the ruthless Richard Alencourt. He flipped through pages, reliving moments, Isabella laughing as she tried to correct his French accent, the two sharing one umbrella on a rainy afternoon. Isabella lost in a book, unaware she was being photographed. The last photo showed only Isabella, looking directly at the camera with a serious, almost solemn expression. It was taken the evening before his departure. "What happened after I left?" Richard asked the silence. "How was your life, Isa? Who was the father of your children? Were you happy?" Questions without answers, now haunting him. Lately, while working to secure custody of Sophia and Daniel, he often wondered how his life would have turned out if he had kept his promise. Would he have married Isabella? Would they have built a family together? Or would they have drifted apart anyway, once time revealed incompatibilities masked by the initial romance? The weight of these unfulfilled possibilities was almost unbearable. Richard turned back to the window, gazing into the night. Somewhere in the city, Sophia and Daniel slept at the orphanage, perhaps dreaming of the new life he had promised them. He guaranteed security, comfort, and education, everything money could buy. But he knew they needed more. They needed someone who could love them as Isabella had. Would he be able to do that? A man who had failed so thoroughly with the only person he had truly loved. The memories of Isabella had stayed buried for so long, stored in a box along with souvenirs and photos. Now they resurfaced with full force, intensified by Sophia's face, so similar to her mother's, and by Daniel's artistic streak, reminiscent of Isabella's free spirit. Richard rubbed his tired eyes. The past was irretrievably lost. Isabella was gone forever, but her children were here, needing him. Perhaps this was the universe giving him a second chance at redemption, not to fix his mistakes with Isabella, but to make a difference in the lives of the children she left behind. He carefully placed the photo back in the box. Tomorrow would be another busy day, more meetings with social workers, lawyers, and preparations for the children's possible arrival at his home. The custody process was moving along, but there were still hurdles to overcome. Before closing the box, he glanced one last time at Isabella's smiling face. "I promise I'll take care of them, Isa," he whispered. "This time, I won't break my promise." As he shut the drawer, he felt a weight start to lift. Regret and guilt would remain, but now there was also purpose, a chance to do something meaningful for the children of the woman he had loved and lost. Mr. Alancourt, please understand that this is not personal. Mrs. Winter's voice, the regional supervisor for child services, sounded professional but unyielding. Richard kept a neutral expression, something he had mastered in countless business negotiations. But this was not a business deal. It was about Sophia and Daniel. With all due respect, it feels quite personal, he replied calmly. I've fulfilled all the requirements. I've adapted my home. I've hired the recommended professionals. I've completed the preparatory courses. They were in the meeting room at the Department of Child Services. Mrs. Palmer, the orphanage director, observed with concern. Next to Mrs. Winters was a young social worker named Gabriela Martinez, who took discreet notes. The issue isn't material or bureaucratic, Mrs. Winters explained, adjusting her glasses. It's the long-term viability. You're a 45-year-old single man with no prior childcare experience, running a business empire that surely demands much of your time. I've changed my schedule. I've delegated responsibilities. I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary. Intentions aren't guarantees, Mr. Alancourt. We need to be sure Sophia and Daniel will have the emotional stability they need, especially after the recent trauma Daniel experienced. We can't risk another disruption if you realize you can't balance your corporate and parental duties. Richard took a deep breath. For most of his adult life, his name and fortune had opened doors. It was unsettling to face resistance, especially when he was genuinely committed. What exactly are you questioning? My ability or my commitment? Both, Mrs. Winters answered bluntly. You need to prove not only that you can provide for the children materially, but that you're willing to prioritize their needs above your own, consistently and permanently. A heavy silence settled over the room. Richard realized none of his usual arguments would work here. He couldn't impress them with figures, intimidate them with his status, or offer financial incentives. For the first time in ages, he had to prove his worth as a person, not a billionaire. What do you suggest then? He finally asked. Gabriela Martinez spoke for the first time. An extended probationary period, supervised visits transitioning to overnight stays and weekends, regular evaluations, a commitment to family therapy, active participation in the children's school routines and activities. Essentially, we need to see you in action, not just hear promises, Mrs. Winters added. Richard nodded slowly. How long? At least 6 months before we consider temporary custody. Another year before permanent custody. 18 months. The bureaucracy felt endless when all he wanted was to give Sophia and Daniel a safe home right now. And during that time, the children stay in the orphanage, even after what happened to Daniel. We've implemented additional security measures, Mrs. Palmer interjected. Thanks to your generous donation, I should add, it's not about money. Richard shook his head in frustration. It's about giving them a family environment. That's exactly why we're being cautious, Mrs. Winters insisted. A big house isn't enough. You have to create a home. Her words stung Richard like a slap. It was exactly what Isabella used to say when they talked about the future in Paris. A house is made of walls and roofs, mon chéri. A home is made of love and shared time. I understand, he said at last. When can we start? You seem thoughtful, Gabriela Martinez commented as they walked down the hall after the meeting. The young social worker had been assigned to supervise Richard's case. Were you expecting a quicker process? I was hoping they'd see the obvious, he answered candidly. Those kids need stability, and I can offer it. Stability isn't just a safe roof and food on the table, Mr. Alancourt. Believe me, I'm aware of that. They stopped by a window overlooking a small playground where a few children played under supervision. Gabriela watched Richard for a moment. May I ask something personal? Why these children specifically? There are hundreds in similar situations in the system. Richard considered the question. He could mention his connection to Isabella, but that would raise more questions. The full truth was more complicated. I met Sophia first. She came to me, determined to find her brother. When I helped locate Daniel, something changed in me. He paused. I've spent 2 decades accumulating money and power. For what? Suddenly, these 2 kids showed up and gave my life real purpose. Gabriela smiled. That's the most genuine answer I've ever heard from a potential guardian. But apparently, it's not enough. It's a good start. Listen, Mr. Alancourt, please, call me Richard. Richard, then, I'll be frank. Mrs. Winters has her doubts, but I believe in you. I've seen how you interact with Sophia and Daniel. That's not something you can fake. He looked at her in surprise. Then why such a long probationary period? Because raising children isn't a short-term project. It's not like closing a deal. It's a lifetime commitment, especially for kids who've already suffered significant loss. She sighed. And be honest with yourself. Do you really know what you're getting into? The question hung between them. Richard recalled the past few weeks, Daniel's recurring nightmares, Sophia's tough questions about her mother, the moments of frustration when he didn't know how to handle an outburst or a meltdown. No, I probably don't, he admitted. But I'm willing to learn. That's the point, Gabriella said with a smile, and I'll help you through it. Let's start today. Gabriella's first lesson involved an unscheduled visit to the orphanage at a time Richard would normally be in important meetings. He cancelled them all without hesitation, surprising his executive assistant. Upon arrival, they found Sophia in the study room, focused on a math exercise. Her face lit up when she saw Richard. Another visit. Today wasn't a visiting day, she exclaimed, running to hug him. Thought I'd surprise you, he said, hugging her back. Daniel is in art therapy, Sophia informed him. He drew you yesterday. Drew me? Yes, Doctor. Leo asked him to draw people who are important to him, and he drew Mom, me, and you. Richard felt a rush in his chest. It was the first clear sign that he had earned some of Daniel's trust. May I see him? He asked. His session ends in 15 minutes, Gabriella said. Meanwhile, Sophia, how about showing Richard what you're learning? The girl nodded eagerly and pulled Richard by the hand to her desk. As she proudly explained two-digit addition, Richard noticed Gabriella observing their interaction closely. Later, when they left Sophia to visit Daniel in the art therapy room, Gabriella remarked, You have a natural way with her. Sophia makes it easy. She's open and communicative. And Daniel? More complicated. He still holds back. I think he's afraid to get attached and be abandoned again. Gabriella nodded. That's a common fear for kids who've gone through what he has. Building trust takes time. Entering the room, they found Daniel putting away art supplies. He looked at Richard warily but didn't move away when the billionaire approached. I heard you made a very special drawing yesterday, Richard said gently. Daniel shrugged, but a slight blush tinged his cheeks. Dr. Liu told me to... I see. You don't have to show me if you don't want to. The boy hesitated, then walked over to a folder and removed a drawing. 3 figures holding hands. A woman with dark hair, a small girl, and a man in a suit. It's really good, Daniel, Richard praised sincerely. You have real talent. Mom used to draw too, he said in a low voice. She taught me. It was the first time Daniel had shared anything personal about Isabella with him. Richard felt privileged to witness it. What else did she teach you? A small smile appeared. How to make crepes, how to fold paper boats, how to sing in French. She sang to you. Every night, Sophia chimed in, walking into the room. Daniel remembers more than I do. A comfortable silence fell, full of unspoken memories of Isabella. Richard felt simultaneously close to and distant from her, close through the children she had loved, distant for all the experiences he'd never share with her. In the following weeks, Gabriella established a rigorous schedule. Richard visited the children at varied times, attended school meetings, learned about child nutrition, bedtime routines, and trauma coping techniques. His mansion was gradually transformed. The 2 bedrooms he'd initially set up were supplemented by a playroom, a study area, and an art studio for Daniel. He hired a housekeeper experienced in childcare and arranged for an in-home therapist. But the biggest challenge was neither logistical nor financial. It was personal. I don't understand why I need all this training, Richard commented after a particularly exhausting lesson on child development. Plenty of parents have half this preparation. Gabriella looked him in the eye. Most parents learn gradually, from the child's birth onward. You're entering midway with kids who already carry emotional scars. It's like jumping straight to advanced level without the basics. I suppose you're right, he conceded. Also, Gabriella went on, you're used to giving orders and having people solve problems for you. Parenting doesn't work like that. You can't delegate when things get tough. Do you think I'd do that? I think it's your default mechanism. Look at how you handled Daniel's disappearance. You mobilized resources, hired people, but the emotional part, the real connection, came afterward. Her words hit Richard hard. It was true. In his adult life, he'd used money and power to keep emotional distance, to control situations without truly engaging. What should I do then? He asked, feeling suddenly vulnerable. Learn to be present, not just physically, but emotionally available. When Sophia cries, when Daniel has nightmares, it's not about fixing the problem, but being there and feeling with them. Richard mulled over her advice. It ran counter to everything he practiced in the business world, where emotions were considered weaknesses. Detachment was valued, and practical solutions always won. I don't know if I can be who they need, he admitted at last. Gabriella smiled. The fact that you're even wondering shows progress. Most people assume they're naturally ready to be parents. The next morning, Richard surprised everyone by announcing a temporary 3-month leave from his executive duties at the company. He appointed his vice president as interim CEO and reduced his responsibilities to the bare minimum. What do you plan to do with that time? Gabriella asked when he told her. Learn how to be present, he replied simply. The first test came sooner than expected. That same afternoon, during a supervised visit, Daniel had an emotional breakdown after seeing a news segment about missing children on TV. The boy hid under a table, trembling and refusing to come out. The old Richard would have called a specialist, offered gifts to distract the child, or tried to fix the problem as efficiently as possible. Instead, he knelt on the floor, keeping enough distance not to invade Daniel's space. I'm here, he said softly. I'm not going anywhere. You can stay there as long as you need. And he stayed. Minutes turned into an hour. His knees ached, but he didn't move. Eventually, Sophia joined them, sitting silently beside Richard, her small hand finding his. When Daniel finally emerged, his eyes red and face tear-streaked, there were no grand declarations or magical solutions, just 3 people sitting on the floor, connected by something deeper than words. Gabriella, observing discreetly, made only one note in her report. Prioritizes emotional needs over quick fixes. Significant progress. That night, alone in his mansion, still awaiting the children he hoped would one day call it home, Richard felt himself changing fundamentally. Not just his routine or environment, but something in his core. For the first time since losing Isabella, he was learning to truly care, to get involved, to risk his heart. It was both terrifying and liberating. And looking at the empty rooms waiting for Sophia and Daniel, Richard realized the real challenge wasn't proving to the system he could be a good guardian. It was proving to himself that he could be more than the empty, wealth-driven man he had become. The call came at 3 in the morning. Richard woke at the first ring, fumbling for his phone on the nightstand. Since he began the custody process for Sophia and Daniel, he slept with the phone within arm's reach, always on alert. Hello? His voice was rough with sleep. Mr. Allencourt, this is Martha from St. Clair's Orphanage. The night supervisor's voice sounded tense. I'm sorry to disturb you, but Sophia is sick. High fever, difficulty breathing. We are taking her to St. Mary Hospital. Richard was already out of bed, reaching for his clothes. What did the doctor say? Is it serious? Seems like pneumonia. The fever started yesterday afternoon, but it got drastically worse in the last few hours. I'm on my way. How's Daniel? He's fine, but very worried. He doesn't want to leave her side. Tell him I'm coming. I'll get to the hospital as fast as I can. Richard ended the call and finished dressing in automatic motions. Driving through nearly empty streets at dawn, his mind flooded with images of Sophia, her determined smile, her unshakable confidence since the day she appeared at his door. The thought of anything happening to her was unbearable. The hospital was bright and quiet when he arrived. At the pediatric emergency reception, A nurse led him to the room where Sophia was. Daniel sat in a chair by the bed, clutching his sister's hand, wearing an expression far too serious for his young face. Mrs. Palmer dozed in a chair in the corner. Sophia looked small and fragile against the white hospital sheets, oxygen tubes in her nose, monitors beeping softly, her usually vibrant face now pale and worn. "Hey, champ," Richard whispered, approaching the bed. Sophia opened her eyes with difficulty. "You came," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Of course I did. I promised I'd always be here if you needed me, didn't I?" A weak smile flickered across her face before she closed her eyes again, exhausted. Daniel glanced at Richard with red-rimmed eyes from holding back tears. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked in a low voice. Richard sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "She will. This is the best hospital in the city, with the best doctors." He tried to sound confident, even though his own heart clenched with fear. Mrs. Palmer stirred with the movement and began updating Richard on Sophia's condition. Bacterial pneumonia, confirmed by tests. She was receiving antibiotics, and her oxygen saturation was under close watch. "The doctor said we caught it in time," Mrs. Palmer explained, "but the next 24 hours are crucial. 24 hours. Richard thought of tense negotiations that lasted days, corporate crises requiring weeks of attention. Nothing compared to this anguish, to the helpless feeling of watching the girl struggle for each breath. "I'm staying," he announced. It was not a question or a request. It was a statement. "Mr. Alancourt, there's no need," Mrs. Palmer began. "I'm staying," he repeated more firmly. "Daniel can stay too, if he wants." The boy nodded, gripping his sister's hand even tighter. Hours dragged on. Richard cancelled all his upcoming meetings with a single message to his assistant. Gabriela Martinez, the social worker, arrived in the morning, surprising him with coffee and fresh clothes she had picked up from his house. "How is she?" Gabriela asked, observing Sophia's restless sleep. "The doctor says she's responding to antibiotics, but they're still worried about the fever." Richard rubbed his tired face. "I should have noticed something was wrong. How could you have known?" "She was quieter than usual during my last visit. I thought she was just tired." Gabriela rested a hand on his arm. "Don't blame yourself. Kids can get sick very quickly." Daniel, who had finally dozed off on an improvised chair, woke with a start. For a moment, he seemed disoriented, until his eyes found Sophia and then Richard. "You're still here," he said, sounding surprised. "I promised I'd stay," Richard responded. "Want to get breakfast? The cafeteria should be open." To his surprise, Daniel nodded and got up. Before leaving, he leaned over his sister and whispered something in her ear. A private ritual between the siblings, Richard realized. In the cafeteria, while Daniel ate without much enthusiasm, Richard noticed how different the boy seemed, more vulnerable and yet more open. "You really like Sophia, don't you?" Daniel asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Richard was taken aback by the direct question. "Yes, I like her a lot. I like both of you very much." Daniel studied his face, as if looking for signs of deception. "Even when it's hard work, even when she gets sick like this." "Especially at times like these," Richard answered sincerely. The boy seemed satisfied with the reply, returning to his cereal. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "Mom was sick for a long time. She said she would get better, but she didn't." Richard felt a knot in his throat. It was the first time Daniel directly mentioned Isabella to him. "I'm sorry, Daniel. It must have been really hard." "Sophia's not going to die too, is she?" The question came out small, filled with fear. Richard's heart twisted painfully. "No, she won't," he assured, silently praying he was right. "This is different, and the doctors know exactly how to treat it." Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing his words. Then, to Richard's total surprise, the boy reached out and briefly held his hand. "Thanks for staying with us." 3 days. Sophia remained in the hospital for 3 long days, and Richard didn't leave her side except for short breaks when Gabriela insisted he take a moment to eat or breathe fresh air. Daniel also stayed, establishing a routine of drawing by his sister's bedside, telling stories when she was awake, or simply holding her hand. During those days, seeing Sophia's fragile life under threat, Richard realized the depth of what he felt. It wasn't merely compassion or a sense of duty. It was love, a love he had never felt before, not even for Isabella. The idea of losing Sophia, or Daniel, was simply unbearable. On the third afternoon, her fever finally broke for good. The doctors, pleased with her progress, said she could be discharged the next day. "We did it," Richard whispered to the girl as he adjusted her pillow. "You were very brave." Sophia smiled, still weak, but with that characteristic determination shining in her eyes. "I knew you'd stay. Daniel knew too." Richard glanced at the boy sleeping on the makeshift chair. "How do you mean?" "He said you were different, that you wouldn't leave when things got tough." The simple words hit Richard hard. He realized that over these months, while he'd thought he was earning Daniel's trust, the boy had also been testing him, assessing his sincerity and commitment. When Gabriella arrived that evening to check in, she found Richard seated between the two children, reading a story while Sophia listened with sleepy eyes and Daniel drew quietly. "Looks like we have good news," she remarked, smiling at Sophia's noticeable improvement. "I'm going home tomorrow," Sophia announced, her energy gradually returning. "That's wonderful." Gabriella turned to Richard. "Can we speak for a moment in the hallway?" Alone, Gabriella regarded him with an expression he couldn't decipher. "What you did these last few days went beyond any expectations, Richard." "I just did what was necessary." "No. Many prospective guardians would have sent money, hired private nurses, maybe visited a few hours. You basically moved into the hospital, neglected your business, and put these kids as your absolute priority." Richard shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Like I said, I did what was necessary." "I know. That's exactly why it matters." Gabriella hesitated. "There's something else. Something I've been holding on to for weeks, waiting for the right moment." She opened her folder and pulled out a small, worn-out book. This was found among Isabella Moreau's personal effects, which the orphanage saved for the children. "It's a diary." Richard looked at the item, feeling a strange chill. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I think you need to read it. Normally, I'd give something like this directly to the children when they're old enough, but in this case," she handed him the diary, "there's information here you need to know. For everyone's sake." Reluctantly, Richard took it. "Are you sure this is appropriate?" "Not everything in my job follows strict rules, Richard. Sometimes you have to do what you believe is right." "Read it, then we'll talk." Gabriella left, leaving him alone in the hallway with the small book in his hands. For a moment, he hesitated. Reading Isabella's diary felt like an invasion, something she never would have allowed while alive. But Gabriella's serious expression intrigued him. What could be so important that it justified breaking Isabella's privacy, even after her death? Richard returned to the room and found both children asleep. He settled into the empty chair, opened the diary, and began to read. The first pages were casual entries about Isabella's life after Paris, her work as a translator, her friends, her dreams. Then he came to an entry dated 3 months after he left, and it grabbed his attention. The test came back positive today. "I'm pregnant." So excited and so scared at the same time. Richard's emails are getting rarer. His calls, when they happen, are brief and all about him. The Richard I knew in Paris seems to be disappearing, replaced by a man obsessed with business and success. How can I tell him about the baby? What if he asks me to choose between my life here and being just a decorative wife for an American businessman? Richard stopped reading, feeling as if the air had been knocked out of him. Pregnant. Isabella was pregnant when he stopped calling, when his promises grew empty. With trembling hands, he continued, "I've made my decision. I won't tell Richard about the baby." His latest emails make it clear his life is now only the company, his father's legacy, and his ambitions. A child wouldn't fit into that perfect, controlled world he's building. My baby deserves a father who will put him first, not someone who sees him as just another responsibility. Maybe one day Richard will change, but I can't wait for that. My baby will be born in 5 months. I'll raise him with all the love I have, and it will be enough. The entries went on, describing the birth of a healthy boy she named Daniel Richard Moreau. Pages were filled with moments from his childhood. First steps, first words, early drawings. Daniel shows so much artistic talent, just like his father, though he never mentions it in our conversations. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice keeping Richard away. Daniel asks about his dad. What can I say? That his father chose money and power over us? No, I'll never break his little heart like that. I just tell him his father is far away and can't be with us right now. Maybe when Daniel is older, I'll tell him everything. Richard flipped the page, tears streaming down his face. Daniel, his son, his biological son, whom he never knew existed. The entry about Sophia's birth 4 years later explained she was the result of a brief relationship that didn't work out. The father wanted nothing to do with the child, so Isabella decided to raise both kids on her own, too proud to ask anyone for help. The last entries, written when she was already ill, broke Richard's heart. The doctor says I don't have much time left. How can I leave my children behind? Where will they go? I thought about contacting Richard, telling him the truth about Daniel. But after all these years, what right do I have? He built his life without us. And I'm afraid, what if he only wants Daniel and not Sophia? I will never allow them to be separated. They're everything to each other. So I remain silent, praying that wherever they go after I'm gone, they stay together and are loved as they deserve. Richard closed the diary, overwhelmed by what he had learned. He looked at Daniel, sleeping peacefully. His son, his flesh and blood, the boy he should have known from birth, whose growth he should have watched, who he should have loved and protected all along. "Are you okay, Richard?" came Sophia's soft voice. She had woken up and was watching him curiously. "Yes, sweetheart," he answered, quickly wiping his tears. "I'm just glad you're getting better." She smiled and closed her eyes again. Richard looked at both children, his son he never knew, and the girl who had won his heart from the moment they met. The revelation changed everything and yet changed nothing. He already loved them both unconditionally before discovering the truth. The only difference now was the added weight of lost years, of moments he would never have with Daniel, of a responsibility he should have assumed from the start. With sudden clarity, Richard realized his fight for custody now went beyond duty or redemption. It was his right as Daniel's father and his responsibility toward Isabella's final wish, that the siblings stay together. The fear of losing them, already immense during Sophia's illness, became almost unbearable. He would not miss another minute of his son's life. He would not let Sophia be without the family she deserved. Holding the diary against his chest, Richard silently vowed to Isabella, to Daniel, to Sophia, and to himself. This time, he would not fail his family. "Are you sure you haven't forgotten anything?" Sophia glanced around the small dorm room one last time, her expression a mix of excitement and a hint of apprehension. The pink suitcase Richard had bought for her lay on the bed, carefully packed with her few belongings. "I don't think so," she answered, clutching a worn teddy bear, the only tangible keepsake of her mother. It was a moment Richard had envisioned for months. After the discovery of Isabella's diary, he had redirected all his determination, resources, and influence to speed up the adoption process. DNA tests confirmed his biological paternity of Daniel, which simplified some of the bureaucracy, though he insisted on adopting Sophia with the same legal rights. Today, at last, he was taking his children home. The word still echoed strangely in his mind. His children. A reality he had never considered until Sophia knocked on his door on that rainy afternoon almost a year ago. "What about Mum's pictures?" Sophia asked, pointing to the small framed photo on the nightstand. "We definitely can't forget that," Richard said, picking up the framed photo in which Isabella smiled, hugging both children in a park. The glass was slightly cracked in the corner, but the image remained perfect, a frozen moment of happiness he had never shared. In the adjacent room, Daniel was also doing his final checks. Unlike Sophia, he had packed his things with methodical precision. His drawing materials, including the set of colored pencils Richard had given him, were neatly stored in a special box he had decorated himself. The rest of his clothes and belongings fit into one backpack and a small suitcase. Since learning the truth about his biological father, Daniel had been quieter than usual. not angry or resentful to Richard's relief, but introspective, trying to reconcile the story Isabella had told about his absent father with the man who now stood in front of him. "Can I take this?" Daniel asked, showing a small, well-worn sketchbook. "Of course you can." "It's yours," Richard replied, recognizing it as the same sketchbook Sophia had shown him on that first day, filled with Daniel's imagined family drawings. "Mom said I inherited my drawing talent from my father," Daniel said casually, though his eyes studied Richard's reaction carefully. Richard felt the familiar pang, guilt, sorrow, gratitude for Isabella keeping his memory alive for their son, even when she had every reason not to. "Your talent is far greater than mine," he admitted. "But yes, I used to draw when I was younger, before business took up all my time. Could we draw together someday?" Daniel asked, almost hesitantly, as though worried he was asking too much. "I'd love that." A comfortable silence settled between them as they finished the last details. Richard noted how different Daniel looked now from the frightened, mistrustful boy he had met months ago. There was a new calmness about him, a cautious acceptance that perhaps, just perhaps, he had finally found the safety he needed. In the hallway, Mrs. Palmer and Gabriela Martinez were waiting with Sophia, who now clung to her suitcase. Other staff members and some children also gathered to say goodbye. A small boy, about 4, held onto Sophia's hand as if he didn't want her to leave. "Tommy, remember what we talked about." Sophia knelt in front of him. "You can visit me. Richard said we can throw parties and invite everyone." Richard smiled, confirming with a nod. He had promised Sophia that the orphanage would always be part of their lives, never severing the ties with those who cared for them during their hardest times. Daniel joined them, carrying his luggage. Mrs. Palmer, unable to hold back tears, hugged each sibling. "I'll miss you both, but I'm so happy," she whispered. "So happy you found a home." "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Palmer," Sophia said. "I promise to be good and not give Richard any trouble." "You're always trouble," Daniel teased with a half smile. "That's your specialty." Sophia stuck out her tongue at him, prompting laughter from the group. It was a light moment in the midst of a significant transition, and Richard felt grateful for the children's ability to find joy in emotionally complex times. Gabriela walked over, handing Richard a folder. "All the final documents are here. Officially, Sophia and Daniel Moreau-Alancourt are now your children under the law." Richard accepted the folder, feeling the weight of the moment. "Thank you for everything, Gabriela. Without you." "Without me, you would have figured it out anyway," she interrupted with a smile. "Maybe it would have taken longer and given you a few more gray hairs. Still, I'm grateful. Don't thank me yet. I'll still have regular follow-up visits for the next 6 months," she teased. "I'll be keeping an eye on you, Richard Alancourt." Finally, it was time for the last goodbyes. Hugs, promises to visit, and a few tears, mostly from the staff and other children, since Sophia was too excited describing to Tommy what her new home would be like, and Daniel seemed eager to begin this new chapter. When they at last got into the car, Richard felt a strange nervousness he hadn't experienced since his first major business deals. But this was far more important than any $1 million contract. "Ready?" he asked, looking in the rearview mirror at the 2 children in the back seat. Sophia nodded enthusiastically, but Daniel was the one who replied, "Yes, Dad." The word, spoken for the first time, washed over Richard like a wave. He looked at his son, and saw in his eyes not just acceptance, but a deliberate effort to build a bridge between them. "Great," Richard managed, once he'd regained his composure. "Let's go home." Richard's mansion had changed in recent months. What was once an elegant, chilly space designed to impress rather than welcome now bore clear signs that children lived there, or were about to. Sophia dashed around the corridors as soon as they arrived, exploring every corner with excitement, her eyes wide at the spacious rooms and refined decor, now softened by warmer touches. "It's a palace," she exclaimed, spinning in the middle of the foyer. Daniel followed at a slower pace, observing everything carefully as though memorizing each detail. "It's really big," he noted, not necessarily sounding impressed, just stating a fact. "It does feel big at first," Richard agreed, "but soon you'll know every corner." "Where are our bedrooms?" Sophia asked, already heading upstairs. Richard smiled, guiding them down the upper hallway. "I prepared a room for each of you, but if you'd rather stay together for a while, we can do that." "We want to see both," Sophia decided, also speaking for her brother, who simply nodded. Richard opened the first door, revealing a room decorated in soft shades of purple and green, Sophia's favorite colors. There was a canopy bed, a bookshelf full of stories, a study desk, and, to her delight, a chest filled with costumes and toys. "It's perfect," she squealed, running inside and touching every surface as if disbelieving its reality. Daniel's room next door had a more subdued decoration in shades of blue and grey. A professional drawing table occupied a corner near a window that offered the best natural light in the house. An easel stood strategically placed, and shelves displayed art supplies that any professional artist would envy. Unlike Sophia's exuberant reaction, Daniel froze in the doorway, gazing at the room with an expression Richard couldn't decipher. "If there's anything you don't like, we can change it," Richard hastened to say. "I tried to guess what you—" "It's perfect," Daniel interrupted, his voice almost a whisper. "How did you know?" "Know what?" "My room in the apartment we had with Mom. It was this shade of blue, and I've always wanted a real drawing table." Richard felt a lump in his throat. "I guess I got lucky." Daniel stepped slowly inside, touching the drawing desk as though it was something precious. "I can really use all this." "It's yours, Daniel." "Everything here is yours." Sophia appeared in the doorway, still brimming with excitement. "My room has its own phone. I can call Tommy whenever I want." "As long as it's not after bedtime," Richard said, trying to set some fatherly limits, though he suspected he might give in if she insisted. The afternoon passed in a thorough exploration of the mansion. Richard showed them the heated indoor pool, the game room, the library, and the massive kitchen, where Mrs. Brown, the new housekeeper he'd hired for her experience with children, was already baking welcome cookies. "What's behind that door?" Sophia asked, pointing to the entrance of Richard's private study. "My office," he replied. "You can come in whenever you want, but I do keep important documents there, so please don't make a mess." "So we can really go anywhere?" Daniel asked, sounding genuinely surprised. "Of course," Richard said, eyeing him curiously. "This is your home now." "At the orphanage, there were lots of off-limits places," Daniel explained. "And before that, in the apartment, Mum had a closet of important things we couldn't touch." Richard smiled, recalling Isabella's organized nature. "Well, here the rules are simple. Respect each other's space, let me know if you leave the yard, and always tell the truth. Everything else we'll figure out together." "Sounds fair," Daniel said, visibly relieved by the simplicity of it. Their first dinner together was a special occasion. Mrs. Brown had prepared each child's favorite dishes, information Richard had meticulously gathered over the past few weeks. Sophia talked incessantly, listing grand plans for sleepovers, swimming lessons, and science projects. Daniel, quieter, ate in silence, but Richard noticed he grew more relaxed with each passing hour. When dessert arrived, chocolate ice cream for Sophia, apple pie for Daniel, Richard felt it was the right time to make a short speech. "I wanted to say something," he began, drawing the children's attention. "I know this move is huge for both of you. A new home, new routines, and I'm new at this too. I've never been a father before." "But you are a father," Sophia corrected in her straightforward way. "At least for Daniel." Richard exchanged a glance with Daniel, who was listening intently. "Yes, biologically for Daniel. But being a father isn't just about biology. It's about love, care, being there. Things I never gave Daniel when he was younger." Richard felt his voice falter slightly. "And I want you both to know that to me, you're equally my children. Sophia, legally you're now my daughter as much as Daniel is my son. There's no difference in my heart." Sophia smiled, seemingly satisfied by his explanation. Daniel kept his gaze on his plate, but Richard noticed he was gripping his fork tightly. "We'll make mistakes," Richard went on. "I know I will. But I promise I'll always try to do my best for you, always listen to you, and never ever fail to be there when you need me." "Like when Sophia got sick?" Daniel asked, finally looking up. "Exactly. I'll be there through every moment, the good and the tough ones. Mom used to say that's what family is, Sophia chimed in. People who stay together even when it's hard. Richard felt his heart tighten. Isabella had taught her children well, despite all she had faced alone. Your mom was very wise, he replied. And speaking of her, I want you to know you can talk about her any time. I want to learn about her through you. Hear your stories. Keep her memory alive in this home. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes, though he fought to hold them back. Sophia, more open with her emotions, let a few tears slip as she smiled. She would have liked you, Sophia declared confidently. I'm sure of it. Hours later, with the children finally settling into their new rooms, Richard sat in his study, holding Isabella's diary. He had read and reread every page over the past weeks, trying to understand the woman he loved and the choices she had made. Now, with her children sleeping under his roof, he understood more deeply why she had kept Daniel from him. The younger Richard Allen Court, obsessed with success and power, would not have been the father Daniel deserved. It took 2 decades, an irreparable loss, and a chance encounter with a determined little girl for him to become the man Isabella might have hoped for. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Daniel wearing new pajamas, looking simultaneously older and younger than his 7 years. Still can't sleep? Richard asked gently. Daniel shook his head. The bed is too soft, and the room is too quiet. I understand. It takes time to get used to a new place. The boy stepped closer, noticing the diary in Richard's hands. Is that Mom's diary? Richard nodded. Yes, I'm trying to know her better through it. She used to write every night, Daniel recalled. Said it was like talking to her own heart. A comfortable silence enveloped them. Daniel seemed to be pondering something important. Can I ask you something? He finally said. Anything. If you had known about me, would you have come to get us? The question Richard had dreaded since learning the truth. He considered offering immediate reassurance, but Daniel deserved honesty. The man I was 20 years ago, I'm not sure, Richard admitted. I was so focused on building wealth and power that I might not have appreciated what truly mattered. Your mom probably knew that. Daniel nodded, processing the confession. But the man I am today, Richard continued. Without a doubt, I would have rushed to you the moment I found out, and I deeply regret every day I missed, every moment of your life I wasn't there for. Daniel was silent for a while, absorbing his words. Then, to Richard's surprise, he reached out and touched the diary. Mom said I'd understand one day, he murmured. I think I'm starting to understand now. Richard felt a deep ache imagining Isabella having that conversation with their son, trying to explain his absence without destroying Daniel's image of him. Your mom was extraordinary, Richard said. She raised you both with so much love and strength. She was, Daniel agreed. She said you had good things in you too, that I got my artistic side from you. Richard smiled. Well, she definitely exaggerated. Your talent is all your own, Daniel. The boy glanced at the clock on the wall. I think I'll try to sleep now. Want me to walk you back to your room? Daniel seemed to think about it. Could you stay until I fall asleep? Just tonight? Of course, Richard said, standing up and gently placing the diary back in the drawer. I'll read you as many stories as you want. As they walked down the hall, Richard hesitantly placed his hand on his son's shoulder. To his surprise and relief, Daniel didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned slightly into the touch, a subtle gesture that might have gone unnoticed if Richard weren't so attuned to every response. In Daniel's room, Richard settled into the armchair beside the bed while the boy nestled under the covers. You know what Sophia told me today? Daniel asked, adjusting his pillow. What? That she always knew she'd find you. That somehow she felt you were waiting for us, even before she met you. He shook his head. She's weird sometimes. Richard smiled. Your sister has a special intuition. Do you think it was a coincidence? Her knocking on your door that day. The question hung in the air, laden with meaning. Richard thought about all the big and small decisions that had led to this moment, his past choices, Isabella's choices, Sophia's path through the rain to his door. I think some people are meant to find each other, he finally said. It might have taken a while, but we ended up where we belong. Daniel seemed satisfied with that answer. His eyes began to close, sleep finally overtaking the day's excitement. "Good night, Dad," he murmured, already half asleep. "Good night, son," Richard replied, savoring the word, feeling both its weight and its lightness. Leaving the room, he noticed Sophia's light was still on. He peeked through the slightly open door and found her sitting up in bed, surrounded by her new books and toys. "Still awake, little one?" Sophia looked at him with shining eyes. "I'm too happy to sleep," Richard chuckled, walking in. "Even the happiest people need rest. Will you stay until I fall asleep? If you want me to." She nodded, gathering her treasures and setting them aside before crawling under the blankets. Once she was snug, she gazed at Richard with eyes so much like Isabella's. "It worked," she declared with satisfaction. "What worked?" "My plan. To find Daniel and to find a family for us." Richard sat on the edge of the bed, touched by the simplicity and depth of her words. "Yes, it worked perfectly," he agreed. "Mom would be happy." Sophia yawned, her eyes beginning to close. She always said that love finds a way. As Sophia drifted off, Richard stayed there, pondering her words. Love finds a way. Isabella had always been the romantic of the two. He had preferred concrete plans and measurable outcomes. Now, watching his newly adopted daughter, his daughter, sleep, and thinking of his son in the next room, Richard finally understood the wisdom behind those words. Through winding, unexpected paths, through loss and redemption, love truly had found a way. And his life, once measured by acquisitions and profits, would forever be defined by these genuine bonds no fortune could buy. Isabella had given him the greatest gift anyone could receive, not only a biological son he never knew existed, but also a courageous little girl who had shown up at his door seeking help and, in doing so, offered him a chance to begin again. A chance to finally learn what it truly meant to be rich. The opportunity to become the father he should have been from the start, one who could give Daniel and Sophia the love, protection, and family they deserved, was now a reality. And in that reality, Richard Allen Court discovered that life's true treasure was not stored in bank accounts, but in the unwavering connection of hearts bound by love, trust, and hope for the future.